Thank you, Jeff. Good evening to everyone. Good morning from London. I would like to start today's session by talking about the findings of the Industry Trust Survey. This survey is hot off the press. It's conducted every 2 years by CFA Institute along with Greenwich Associates. We'll all agree that when someone entrusts their hard-earned money to someone else to manage, it's a very big decision they make. So the objective of this survey is to find out how are investors doing. What are their expectations from people who are either advising them or managing their money, and what professionals can do better to meet those expectations. As you can see, trust is not given uniformly across the globe. Where I sit in UK, trust levels are pretty low, in fact, all over Europe. You can see in Australia, in the aftermath of Royal Commission on Misconduct in Banking and Financial Services, the trust levels have gone down quite sharply, lowest of anywhere in the world at 24%. Let's try and look at these findings from the prism of relative rankings of different industries. As we can see that financial services continues to lag behind many other industries as far as trust levels go. Trust in our industry hit rock bottom after the last financial crisis, which was almost a decade ago. And since then, the trust levels have been gradually inching up. But as these two slides show us, we still have a very, very long way to go. I would like to show you some covers of Fortune magazines over the last two crises, which tell us a very powerful story. This was the cover of the Fortune magazine after the last mortgage crisis, credit crisis. These are the CEOs of the 4 largest investment banks in the world. And the question being asked is, what were they smoking? The previous crisis before the credit crisis was the tech bubble. And this was the cover of the Fortune magazine after that, dot-com bubble. Can we ever trust Wall Street again? So these covers, along with the first 2 slides, the findings of the trust survey, are telling us a very powerful story. Investors do not trust our industry to be doing the right thing. So then the question arises, what do investors want? Investors want advisors they can trust. They want managers who put client interests first. In times of volatility, they require a little bit of extra love and hand-holding. In this digital age, they need assurances that their manager, their advisor has security measures in place to protect their data. But above all, investors require actions that demonstrate transparency. Clear, consistent communication about fee, upfront conversations about conflict of interest, simple, easy to read investment reports. Investors expect their advisors, their managers to consistently demonstrate an ethical mindset, to consistently demonstrate integrity. And they're not really asking for the moon, because at the core of our industry is the concept of stewardship, the careful and responsible management of money entrusted to our care. So now we know that there is an issue, trust levels need to be higher, and we know that it's a cause of concern. So what should we do about it? And very often in life, I find it helps to go back to the very basics. And I put it down in the form of 3 simple questions we can ask ourselves when confronted with an ethical dilemma, when taking any action on behalf of our clients. Does this violate the law? Because if the response to question number 1 is yes, that's pretty much a hard stop. We should not be going any further. But we also, if the response to question number 1 is no, it does not violate the law, it's legal, we still need to ask ourselves, are our actions ethical? Question number 2, is this honest? And 3, are they fair? What would I feel if I were on the other side in the shoes of my client? And I think the issue in our industry is very often we stop at asking ourselves question number one, and if the response to that is no, it does not violate the law, we pretty much feel we have the carte blanche, we have complete freedom to go ahead and act in a manner that we like. Does anyone know which was the first recorded bubble in the history of financial markets? It was the tulip speculation in 17th century Holland. For some reason, Dutch people were enamored by these beautiful flowers. They were buying tulips, they were buying tulip fields. They just could not get enough of these flowers. And when things got out of control, some enterprising people started promising that they will deliver they will deliver these flowers at a future date, knowing fully well that when the time came, they would not be able to make good on their promise. And if I look at their behavior of the participants, it did not really cross the legal boundaries, but it definitely crossed the boundaries of honesty and fairness. And today's session is going to be a lot about asking ourselves question number 2 and question number 3. This slide always reminds me of a movie I saw again recently, and there was a dialogue in that, and I paused and I rewound it. Wall Street Part 2, Money Never Sleeps. In that, Michael Douglas is having a conversation with his daughter is dating Shia LaBeouf, and they are having a conversation. And Shia LaBeouf, he raises a concern about what's happening in the environment around them, in the financial environment. And Michael Douglas says, of course, what's happening is unethical, but it's not illegal. And recently when I saw that movie, I froze it and I saw it again. And I'm like, this syncs very beautifully with the message I'm trying to convey in this particular slide. So the key message I'm trying to say is, even if something is legal, should we still be doing it? Is it ethical? This is one of the best definitions of ethical behavior that I have come across. It's doing the right thing when no one else is watching, even when doing the wrong thing is legal. Really thinking back to asking ourselves those 3 questions. Kylie, if we could put up the first poll now. Which has more influence on whether a person will engage in unethical conduct? Is it a person's disposition, a person's moral character, or do we think outside circumstances have a bigger role to play in whether a person will engage in unethical conduct? You can see the poll up. Let's vote, and then we'll see how this group thinks about this particular issue. Thank you. I can see a lot of poll results coming in. A lot of people are voting. We'll give you a few more seconds to just think about it and vote. Okay. So these are interesting findings. 65% of this group thinks it's a person's moral character. 35% thinks it's outside circumstances. Let's park these results here for the time being. And I would like to talk to you about an experiment that took place in the early 70s. Many of you may have heard the name of Professor Philip Zimbardo. He's a well-known psychologist, and he was a professor at Stanford University. And he was grappling with exactly the same question on which we seem quite divided today as a group: the dispositional versus situational attribution of behavior. He was a professor, he took a bunch of students, and he decided to do an experiment. So he took students and he divided them into 2 categories, prisoners and guards. And then a makeshift prison was created in the basement of Stanford University. The idea was it must replicate real life as far as possible. So there were dingy, narrow corridors. The cells for the prisoners were tiny with paint peeling off. Even the uniforms that were issued keeping in mind that it must be as close to real life as possible. So the guards, they got smart, well-fitting starch uniforms. The prisoners, they got loose, ill-fitting faded robes. The kind of robes you wear on a sunny day like today in London, and you will end up feeling depressed. They were given these outfits, and they were all put in that prison. And now Professor Zimbardo and his colleagues are watching everyone's behavior. Much to their surprise, most participants adapted to their assigned roles, far exceeding Professor Zimbardo's expectations. The guards in their smart, well-fitting starched uniforms with that newfound sense of authority and aura, they started abusing, bullying, harassing, torturing the inmates. Who were these inmates? Many of them were their classmates. The prisoners in that depressing environment of that prison, many of them started accepting this behavior in a docile manner. Some of them even had a mental breakdown. Things got so out of hand, out of control, that an experiment which was meant to last for 2 weeks had to be abandoned in 6 days because behaviors were going all over the place. So, Kylie, we can stop sharing the polling results now. So, the findings of this experiment tell us that some studies have shown that situational influences have more to do with a person's ethical behavior than their disposition. Under the right conditions, or for that matter, the wrong conditions, as in the Stanford prison experiment, good people, like many of us, can be induced, seduced, and initiated to act unethically. And I'm not saying that we will go out and we'll start abusing our colleagues and our friends. What I'm saying is that in a hyper-competitive world of finance where we work, there are multiple pressures on us at all times. Pressure to keep the boss happy, pressure to keep the client happy, pressure to think about our next promotion, pressure to think about our performance metric at the end of the quarter. Many a times, all of these can combine and overwhelm us to act in a manner which may not be in sync with how we like to think of ourselves as ethical individuals. And we'll talk about some of those influences today. Kindly, we can stop sharing the poll results, please. This is the next slide. Let me just read the, Kylie, if we can just stop showing the poll so that I can read the case for everyone, so that everyone can see the case. You are a fixed income portfolio manager, and you are part of a team that invests the money of large institutional clients. Some of the members tell you in confidence that they are going to resign from the firm and start their own practice. They invite you to join, but you decline. You know that your actions will at least temporarily affect the performance of your client portfolios. However, you say nothing to your superiors. Your actions are okay because you are respecting the confidentiality of your colleagues. Probably okay because personnel turnover is a commonplace occurrence in our industry. Probably not okay because client performances will be affected when they leave, or you think it's not okay for some other reason. You can see the poll is open. Feel free to vote the way you like, and then we'll talk about the case then. So the facts are, you are part of a team. Some of your colleagues, not one or two, quite a few of them decide to leave, which is a commonplace occurrence. It happens. How they make you an offer, you politely decline. However, you are also aware when they leave, client portfolios are going to get adversely affected in the near term. But you decide to do nothing about that. Your actions are okay because you are respecting the confidentiality of your colleagues. Probably okay because personnel turnover is a commonplace occurrence. Not okay because client performances will be affected, or you feel it's not okay in any circumstance. We'll give you a minute or so to cast your votes. Okay, so we seem to be, again, I like it when we have a diversity of opinions here. Let's see, Kylie, are there any comments? Are people saying anything about the case?
Hi. No, I haven't had any comments, but if you would like to comment, you can put up your hand and I can unmute you.
Okay, so let's go through all of these responses one by one. Let's look at the first response. 11% of the group said so. You are respecting the confidentiality of your colleagues. Fair enough. Especially in our industry, we spend so many hours at work that many of our colleagues end up becoming friends as well. And that kind of creates a conflict in our mind. Are we breaking their trust by talking about something that they told us in confidence? Fair enough. Personnel turnover is also a commonplace occurrence, especially in our industry. And that leads us to question ourselves, is this my problem? Should I be concerning myself with this issue? Majority of this group feels it's not okay because client performances will be affected when they leave. We talked about the concept of stewardship. It's nothing but client interest comes first. And you saw the first 4 slides when we talked about the low trust levels and investors believing that we are not doing the right thing as an industry. And in this case, obviously something to think about for us, and very often when faced with an ethical dilemma, this is a big tip that I would like to leave you with today. And I find that it works very well in real life dilemmas. When confronted with a situation where you are conflicted, I think it helps to take a step back and just think, who do I owe a duty to in this circumstance? And in different circumstances, our duty will be owed to different people or entities. And in this case, when you think about it with a clear head, our primary duty is towards our client. So of course, we need to do something about it. Having established this, let's think about what we need to do. What can we do about it? It's not a binary situation. It's not that either you do nothing or you go to your manager or you go to your HR department and you complain. There are ways to think about this situation. Maybe think about having a conversation with these colleagues. Very often I have found that people are not even aware of the consequences of their actions. You would be surprised how many well-meaning, good-intentioned people there are who might not be aware of the consequences of their actions. So sometimes it just helps to have that conversation, have that constructive dialogue with them and make them aware. And probably that will help them think to, do it the right way. The message I'm trying to convey through this case is being a passive bystander under this situation may not be the best of options. Knowing fully well that we owe a duty to our client, we need to do something in this situation. Okay. Let's move on to the next. So the key point really is that we often make unethical decisions, not because we are bad people, but because psychological biases and situational influences can affect our decision making. These biases and influences, they create weakness in how we process information and make decisions which can lead to unethical behavior. Shortly, we'll be looking at some of these situational influences. In the meantime, Kylie, if we can bring up poll number 2, which according to you is more practical? It's kind of a fun question. I put it in there because sometimes ethics can be seen as a boring topic and we can have some fun as well. Which according to you is more practical, being ethical 98% of the time or being ethical 100% of the time? Look at the wording of the case. I am asking you which according to you is more practical. Okay, so we have around 70% of the participants saying being ethical 100% of the time, and 1/3 of the participants feel it's being ethical 98% of the time. the feedback that I get very often when I'm doing it in front of a live audience, people say that it's good to have a buffer. You know, many times, even if we know what the right thing to do is, we may not be able to do it, or we may be compelled not to do it due to our circumstances. So it's just like keeping a buffer, like we do, like we cheat on our diet at Christmas time, just a buffer like that, so that even when we do know what the right thing to do is, maybe just 2% of the time or 3% of the time, so that keeps some sort of leeway. The argument that I hear most often from people who choose being ethical 100% of the time is, when you know what the right thing to do is, it just makes so much sense to just do it instead of thinking, should I do it, should I not do it? Just simplify life, just keep it simple. You know what the right thing to do is, just do it, irrespective of the hardship that it may cause me in the short term. So I put this question out there to introduce a very, very important concept. The concept being that of the slippery slope. Let me move my slides. Incrementalism, the slippery slope. The first dishonest act is the most important one to prevent. It is easier to be ethical 100% of the time than 98% of the time, because that 2% leeway you give yourself becomes 3, and then 5, and then 10, and then you never know where you end up with that. If you look at the companies that filed for bankruptcy, WorldCom, Enron, and I've read books written by whistleblowers on these companies, it always started with, small acts of earnings management by managers who felt that what they were doing was closer to reality, and the next quarter comes, things will be fine. However, next quarter came, things got harder, they pushed harder, and from there, the descent down the slippery slope was pretty phenomenal. Bernie Madoff, he's serving a 140-year prison term for the largest Ponzi scheme in the world. And we are not condoning his behavior, but he said something pretty similar. He said it began with adjusting returns for weak performance in one quarter, with plans to adjust it, with plans to correct it in the following quarter. However, next quarter came, performance did not improve, and it kept escalating. So the point is that to be very, very aware of our descent down the slippery slope. Let's look at some other situational influences. Obedience to authority. We are far more likely to indulge in unethical conduct when asked by a supervisor, when asked by a boss. And bosses are very smart. They would rarely ever ask us to indulge in unethical behavior in a very straightforward manner. It will be couched in terms like assets under management or our performance metrics at the end of the quarter, which makes it difficult for us to understand that something is going on. Conformity with others, we take our cues about the proper way to act from our colleagues, from our peers in the industry, from our friends. How do we justify it? We say if everybody else is doing it, it must be okay. We already talked about incrementalism. Overconfidence in our own ability to act appropriately. We all think, we all believe that we are more sorted, we are more ethical than others, and we would not fall into the trap of indulging in unethical conduct. We will know when we see an ethical dilemma, and we'll be able to do the right thing. And that leads us to take actions without indulging in adequate ethical deliberation. Recently, a few months ago, I was presenting to a bank in Australia, and we had the leadership of the bank sitting there. And one of them said something very interesting, which has stayed with me. It made me reflect. And I could see that what he said was exactly how it played out in my career. And I would like to leave this thought with you to think about how you think of it as you progressed in your career. He said, Sonia, in the initial years when I started working, when I was fresh to the industry, I was more influenced by the first two influences: obedience to authority, listening to my boss, and conforming with others, following what my peers and others did. He said, however, as I acquired success, as my career progressed, as I moved up in my organization, and now that I sit in the leadership team, I have to be far more cognizant of the last two situational influences. Incrementalism, because many a times in my position, I can get away with a few things without anybody correcting me because I am the boss, right? And also overconfidence in my ability to act appropriately. Just because I am successful, I might think that whatever I'm doing is correct. And for many of us, it plays out that way. When we are younger, when we are fresher in our careers, we are looking up to our bosses, we are blindly following what our groups are doing. But however, as we progress, we need to be very, very aware of the descent down the slippery slope, as well as overconfidence in our own ability. So something for you to think about. So the goals today are pretty simple: to become more conscious about our thoughts and behavior so that we are more likely to notice them and act upon them before they become a problem. To recognize that ethical dilemmas are a normal and predictable part of most jobs. And we will discuss some approaches to deal with ethical issues. Our next question for you is, let's read the case first. You are a portfolio manager in the international sector. You travel to a foreign country to investigate investment opportunities for your institutional clients. The management of a company that you visit and a potentially attractive investment opportunity gives you a very expensive gift. Refusing the gift would be considered an insult in this country and harm the good relations that you have developed with the company's management. So here are the facts. You're a portfolio manager, you go to a foreign country, and you find this very attractive investment opportunity for your clients. However, the management of the company gives you a very expensive gift. You are aware that refusing the gift would be considered an insult in that country, and it would harm the relationship that you have developed with the company's management. Under these circumstances, accepting the gift is okay because refusal would jeopardize an investment opportunity for our clients. Probably okay if we give the gift to charity. Probably not okay unless you tell your supervisor that accepting the gift is that you accepted the gift, or you believe accepting an expensive gift is not okay, irrespective of what the circumstances. Kylie, if we can bring up the poll, please. Poll number 3. Let's see how this group thinks about this situation. This is a real life case which one of our colleagues faced, and we wrote a case out of it. We'll give you a couple of minutes to think through it and poll, cast your poll, votes. It's interesting, I'm not seeing any votes for option number A. We'll give it a few more seconds. Okay, let's discuss the findings. Most of you have voted. Let's discuss the findings. It's interesting that no one voted for option A because we talked about client interest coming first, and this is a very attractive investment opportunity for your client. So if it jeopardizes an investment opportunity, maybe, you know, that makes us think, what should we be doing in this scenario? Should we be refusing this gift and spoiling that, that relationship that we've created? I always find it intriguing when people choose option number 2. Probably okay if you give the gift to charity. I want us to think about what is the ethical dilemma here. The ethical dilemma here is clearly that accepting an expensive gift could or could be seen, both are equally important. It could or it could be seen to compromise our to impact our independence and objectivity. We might feel pressured to invest our clients' money in that particular company. And So what does giving it to charity do? People say very often I receive a response that if I have given it to charity, I am not personally benefiting from that gift. So we are going to park this here and come back. But the point is that once you have accepted that gift, that equation of benefit has already been established. That, you know, you accepted that gift from that company. Afterwards, what you did with it, it matters. But the fact is, the moment you accepted that expensive gift, that kind of dynamic of you receiving a benefit has been established. So just giving it to charity may not be the best option. Probably not okay unless you tell your supervisor that you accepted the gift. Disclosure is important. What does disclosure do? Disclosure gives our employer, our client, and heavens forbid if things were to go haywire, maybe the regulator, an opportunity to assess our independence and objectivity. So maybe just disclosing it to your supervisor is not adequate in this case. Maybe you need to disclose it to your client as well, whose money you are investing there. In an ideal world, I would say option number 4, not okay. Never accept a very expensive gift. But we all know that we live in a real world and we have to confront these ethical dilemmas. And there is an attractive opportunity and we want to invest our clients' money there, and having a good relationship with the management would help us do that. And refusing the gift would be considered an insult. So if we absolutely must do that, there are ways to deal with it going forward. Adequate disclosure is a very good way to deal with it. Many companies, what they do after the employee has disclosed, they pool all these gifts. So no individual benefits from them. They pool these gifts and perhaps they give it out to charity, the money that they get from there. Or sometimes they would just go out for the whole team would go out for a nice meal at Christmas time. Many companies have very robust policies and procedures around gifts, but you would be surprised that how many times I've stood in front of a room full of people where the employee said either that their company did not have a robust policy or they were not aware of that. And very often we have people from HR and compliance in the room when we are doing these sessions. So the idea of putting up these cases also to make them aware that by having strong, robust policies and procedures around these issues, they are protecting their employees from falling into these situations where they are conflicted how to act. Any comments, Kylie? Anything anybody would like to say?
No comments. Someone did say just to say that it's not appropriate to accept in our country.
Fair enough. So cultural values also come into place. Like we saw in this country, its refusal is not okay, whereas in some countries accepting is not okay. But our trainings are meant for global audiences, and many a times people face these dilemmas. So thank you for that comment. Okay. My slides are taking some time to move forward. This is CFA Institute mission statement: to lead the investment profession globally by promoting the highest standards of ethics, education, and professional excellence for the ultimate benefit of society. The last 6 words were added after the last financial crisis, when there was a lot of deliberation at our end, and we came to the conclusion that investment profession cannot exist in a bubble. It must be synced with what's good, with what's beneficial for the larger society. These code and standards provide useful guidelines for professionals like yourselves to deal with ethical dilemmas, the kind of dilemmas we've seen in the last 2 cases. What I've done is, in the next slide, I have picked some fundamental ethical principles which are the building blocks of these code and standards. We'll spend a couple of minutes on these. Client interest comes first. We've already established that. Independence and objectivity in a case like the gift case. we can see that there is our independence and objectivity could get compromised in certain situations. Avoiding conflicts of interest. In real life, it's very difficult to avoid all conflicts of interest. We can learn to manage them. Disclosure is a good way to do that. Prohibition against using material non-public information. Maintaining the confidentiality of our client data. Dealing with all our clients fairly. Diligence is literally what it means in the English language. Put in the work. Just because you heard something in an internet chat room or over lunch you heard about a hot security does not mean that you go and you invest your client money there. And my favorite really is reasonable care and prudent judgment. Care means causing no harm to our clients. Prudence means acting with caution, acting with diligence, acting with care, acting with skill. And if you follow the first 8 principles, automatically you are acting with prudent care and with prudent judgment and reasonable care. I like to put this slide. These are the headlines of Wall Street Journal the day after Lehman filed for bankruptcy. And I like to put it immediately after the slide on fundamental ethical principles, because what happened in last financial crisis when mortgages of suspect quality were being bundled together and these highly volatile mortgage-backed securities were receiving stellar ratings from credit rating agencies, and these toxic, volatile, highly risky securities were being bought into client account by many advisors and managers. Many of these clients were planning for their retirement. I feel all these fundamental ethical principles were flouted. And it gives us some food for thought to think about these principles when we are taking any actions on behalf of our clients. We are living in times of pandemic, so I have put a case today related to pandemic, and I would like us to think a little bit about it. Because of a global pandemic, Everett Inc., a major sports equipment manufacturer, has temporarily shut down its operations and laid off several employees. The government is considering invoking its emergency powers and contracting with the company to make desperately needed medical equipment. A team of Everett's engineers is working on retooling the machines at the company's manufacturing plant. As and when regular production resumes, the company will be eligible to receive low-cost government stimulus plan that would impact its long-term financial position. Jabri, the company's CFO, is also responsible for investor relations as well as managing the employee pension plan. He's grappling, there is so much of information out there. They've laid off several employees, they've shut down some operations, government is considering invoking emergency powers, they might be contracted to make desperately needed medical equipment. The engineers are retooling the machines at the manufacturing plant. The company will be eligible to receive low-cost government stimulus plan. How it will impact the financial position. There is so much going on. And Mr. Jabri is conflicted. I want you to put yourself in his situation. How would you communicate with your clients? What would you do? Would you refrain from providing any of the above information as the future? And truly, it seems very, very uncertain. Would you disclose the potential government contract and that the engineers are working on retooling? Would you express confidence to investors that, in your opinion, the low-cost government loans will result in minimal disruption to the profitability projections? Or would you protect investor interest by actively discussing Everett's long-term financial prospects to keep the stock price from collapsing? Put yourself in Mr. Jabri's position, and then let's see how we vote. Kylie, if you could please open the polls. Do think about all the conflicting situations that are going on before you cast your vote. Some interesting results I can see. Let's give it a few more seconds. Almost half the participants have voted. I would encourage everyone else to vote as well so that we can see how we think about it as a group. Okay, let's discuss the results. Thank you, Kylie. So the key issue here is he's responsible for providing adequate information to investors so that they can make informed decisions in this very, very volatile, highly volatile environment. So refraining from providing any of the above information seems like not a very good option at this point in time. If you put yourself in the shoes of those investors who want some information, they want to decide what they should be doing with their investment in the company, they would require some information. Let's look at the second option. Disclose the potential government contract and that the engineers are working on retooling. Even though these are factual, I think Mr. Jabri must take into consideration at what stage they are. Are they at a very initial stage? He should ensure that he's not divulging confidential information. He's not divulging material non-public information to his investors. He also has to be very, very thoughtful about A, how he divulges this information, keeping in mind that the confidential aspects are not divulged, and B, that it must reach all investors. It should not be that it reaches a select group of investors while others are not privy to it. Expressing confidence to investors that in its opinion, the low-cost government loans will result in minimal disruption. Again, the low-cost government loans, he needs to consider whether it has been, is it confirmed or is he divulging in confidential information here? Is it publicly known? So that's first part of the statement. The rest of the statement seems a little bit speculative. It seems a little bit more of his opinion that the results it will result in minimal disruption to the profitability projections. And in this environment, and in any environment, as CFA Institute code and standards tell us, we must not be mixing our opinions with facts. So he has to be very clear about what he is saying, his opinion or the facts. Protecting investor interest is a laudable goal, but not by giving misleading information, by saying that long-term financial prospects are very bright, because frankly, he doesn't know right now what the long-term prospects will look like when all these pieces fall in place. So what we are trying to say is, he has a very tough balancing act at this point in time. Of course, not doing anything, not giving any information is not an option. He must give out factual information and informed view, keeping in mind that he's not divulging confidential information, keeping in mind he's not confusing facts with opinions. And he has to make sure that that good mix, that proper mix of information is given out to the clients, that it helps them to make informed decisions at this very, very volatile time. Thank you. So now let's look at, so we can see that how difficult a situation many of these CFOs or many of these investment firms are in at this point in time about the kind of information that they can give out. I would like to briefly talk about the ethical decision-making framework. This framework has been developed by CFA Institute. It's a kind of tool to help investment professionals analyze situations, the kind of situations we just discussed. It has 4 key components. The starting point is recognizing that there is an ethical dilemma. Once you have recognized it, you need to identify the ethical principles involved. Is it independent? We saw in the gift case, it was independence and objectivity. Who do you owe a duty to? We saw in the first case, the team's case, the primary duty was owed towards our clients, knowing that client portfolios will be impacted. What are the important facts? In the last case we saw, there were a few important facts that Mr. Jabri had to keep in mind. We need to see, are there any additional conflicts of interest which are further compounding this situation? Then we need to move on to consider, are we acting under certain situational influences? Are we acting under the influence of our boss? Or are we being very overconfident about our own ability to do the right thing? Are we justifying our actions by saying just this one time, the classic slippery slope? Are there alternative actions? In the team's case, we saw there were alternative actions to have a dialogue with your colleagues and make them realize the impact of their actions. Do we need to seek any additional guidance from our bosses, from our mentors in the industry? Once we have seen all this, we need to act by making a decision. Sometimes we might need to elevate the issue to a higher authority, which could be our HR to our boss, HR department, compliance department, and in extreme scenario, if there is something illegal going on, to an outside regulator. After having done all this, we need to reflect. Did we identify all the ethical principles clearly? Did we figure out all the conflicts of interest? Because every time we do this, next time when we are confronted with an ethical dilemma, we'll feel better equipped to deal with them, keeping in mind the fundamental ethical principles and the ethical decision-making framework. Looking at the time, we've got, say, 10 minutes left now. So I'm going to skip this case because I want to talk to you about a few more things. These are some of the rationalizations we use, we say to ourselves to justify our unethical behavior. We already have talked about some of them, but what I'm trying to say is next time you find yourself justifying your own behavior by saying any of these sentences or any derivatives of them, I think it should give you some cause for pause. Run this by the legal department, but run super fast so the ethics department does not see the classic tussle between legal and ethics. What I really want to do is, in summing up, talk to you about a real case study, and which will bring together everything that we've discussed in the last hour. So the gentleman you see on your screens, his name is Mr. Hayes, Mr. Tom Hayes. The title of this slide, The Spider Network, is a well-known book written by the Wall Street Journal journalist. And when I read this book, it made me think that it incorporates a lot of what we discuss in our ethics training. So I made a slide out of it. Mr. Hayes was hired by UBS for their Tokyo desk in 2006. He was a very smart trader, very, very diligent, very dynamic, very hardworking. And very quickly, he was making a lot of money for the bank through his trades. Mr. Hayes had this very nice network of traders and brokers across global institutions who were helping him manipulate LIBOR in a direction that would be beneficial, that would be profitable for his trades. In fact, when the last financial crisis hit, Mr. Hayes was at the top of his game. He was making millions and millions of dollars in profits for his bank. In fact, that year, the summer of that year, Citibank approached him with a $3 million sign-on bonus, which he refused. Sorry, Goldman Sachs approached him with that offer. And later that year, Citibank approached him with a similar offer, which he accepted. So when all this unraveled, he was working with Citibank. In the aftermath of the crisis, there was a lot of chatter about reliability of LIBOR, and investigators started looking at it, and their investigation led them to Mr. Tom Hayes. When the investigations intensified, Citi, which had paid $3 million sign-on bonus to hire Mr. Hayes, promptly let go of him. He's got an 11-year prison term. He's behind bars, away from his young son and wife, and he'll probably not be allowed to work in the industry ever again. That's one part of the story. The part of the story that I really want to focus on today is what he said in the quote. He said manipulating LIBOR seemed like common industry practice. Everyone else was doing it. Remember the situational influence? Everyone else is doing it. Who am I to question? He also said, my superiors were aware of my actions. In fact, they continuously pushed me to pursue a more envelope pushing strategy to try harder to make more money for the bank. Again, working under the influence of our bosses. When I read this book, it also made me realize that Mr. Hayes did not get up one fine day and decided he'll act unethically. It happened incrementally. Once he got away with it in a small way, it emboldened him, it enhanced his confidence, and then the scale became larger and larger. So I like the way all 4 situational influences that we talked about earlier in this session came together very beautifully, and in Mr. Hayes' case, and resulted in some very severe wrongdoing. So I thought it's useful for us to end this session by talking about this real life example and how any of us could be susceptible to a situation like this. I would like to end today's session by a very lovely quote from Warren Buffett. After they obey all rules, I want my employees to ask themselves if they are willing to have any contemplated act appear the next day on the front page of their local paper, to be read by their spouses, children, and friends, with the reporting done by an informed and critical reporter. In this digital age, I want to think of a YouTube video of your behavior going viral. And it is being watched by your colleagues, by your bosses, by your spouse, your partner, your kids. And if that makes you uncomfortable, I think it should give you cause for pause. Thank you very much. If there are any comments, any questions, I'm happy to address. We still have a couple more minutes.